Sarah. We are going to make a couple of loaves of sourdough. So I'm going to explain the method and give you the recipe in a text, so you don't necessarily have to get the recipe from my description now. Just watch the method at this point. So what I have to make this happen, already I've mixed 1 bowl of dough. And this, I'm going to do it again just to show you. So I would recommend you make a double recipe. So everything I do here is a double recipe. And it's good to just do it once a week. And you know, these bread loaves freeze really well. So just always, I would say, work with a double recipe amount. So we have a scale, we have a mixing bowl, we have a whisk, we have salt, we have starter, we have filtered water, and we have bread flour. So I also use Vital Wheat gluten. It is not necessary. I use it because it gives your bread a good chew, a little bit more lift, but honestly, if you have good quality bread flour, you don't need this. Okay, so let's just go right to it. Double recipe for me is 1,000 grams of bread flour in my nice big bowl. And just go and dump it right in. Oh, wow, very good. So close. Okay, so that's done. To that, I'm going to add 14 grams of salt. So that's about 7 grams per loaf. You could use less. I wouldn't use much more. You can always salt your bread later when you eat it with your butter. Okay. And for me, when I incorporate gluten, I use 2 tablespoons per loaf. So that's 4 tablespoons for a double recipe. Here's my starter. And you'll have lots of videos sent to you about dealing with your starter. But mine has nicely doubled. I'm going to use 100 grams for a double recipe. So that's about 50 grams of starter per loaf. So again, I'm just going to measure that right in. 100 grams is actually not very much. It's pretty forgiving. I'm not like super exact with my measurements. Close enough. So that's about 108 grams. That's good enough. And to 1,000 grams of flour, I add 700 mils or grams of water. So that's 350 grams of water per loaf. You can use tap water. I am using my Brita filtered water. Okay, so now this is everything that we needed in it. And now we're going to just loosely incorporate this into what we call a shaggy dough. And that's why, you know, I like a nice sturdy whisk, because I will start with a whisk and I will end with my hand. You can use your hand right from the beginning, but expect it to be completely covered in dough. So what you're trying to do here is you're trying to cut a little bit of that starter into this dough. So it's as evenly distributed as possible. But as you can see when I get my hand in there, it really does, just by trying to work it into a dough with where all the flour is incorporated, you will have worked it fairly significantly. So there's a special bread whisk or something that I thought, I was always wondering when I saw this tool what it meant, and I saw it used, and it's a pretty cool tool. But you know, like this kind of whisk is also really good, almost like a flipper whisk. Okay, so now I'm just going to use my hand for the rest of this. I never use flour to prevent sticking of the dough to my hand. I always use water. Just use basic tap water just to turn those dry ingredients and wet ingredients into what we call a shaggy dough. And you can, you know, squeeze it, because again, what you're trying to do is get that sort of what they call levain of starter really into that dough. And I will literally soak my hand in water just so that eventually that dough will come off my fingers. Get it off the edges. And this is the first stage of dealing with this dough. And this is such an easy recipe because time is more of a part of the process than you actually touching your dough. You're going to use time rather than kneading with your hands. You will never really knead this dough. You're going to stretch it, you're going to develop gluten, but you won't ever put it on the counter, at least not my method, and knead it traditionally. That's the great thing about sourdough, is that it really is kind of a low or no knead bread, and yet you still get really great crumb, really great chew, and awesome flavor with not a lot of manual labor. So as you can see, this dough, I'm going to leave it now, and we're going to do what some people call the autolyse or autolyze part of making bread, which is essentially just allowing the flour to absorb the water. And that in itself develops gluten and takes a little bit of the kneading process out of your hands. This is going to sit for an hour. It can sit for up to 2 to 3 hours depending on your schedule, but you know, let's just, for the sake of a standard recipe, say from this point, from the mixing to now to touching it again, is an hour. So I use a little shower cap because you don't want your dough to dry out. You can use saran wrap, you can use a wet towel, whatever you want, but shower caps at the dollar store are cheap. So we will come back to this in an hour, and then we'll go on to the next step.